I will introduce to you your moderator, senior editor at Irish Tech News, Simon Cocking.
Very much. So I guess if all the guys who are on our panel can come up, that would be great. I see Paul and cool. Paul, Brent, Alon, and Jonathan. Lovely. Okay, so
quick to get the water.
We're going to be talking about innovation and culture within organizations, and this can be a big challenge with large organizations, and so we have 4 people who have some great perspectives from quite diverse backgrounds. So I'm just going to get them, for those of you who don't know who they are, to explain who they are. And maybe we start from the end. Brent, do you want to just give the guys an idea of where you're coming from?
Okay, I've talked super fast. You want to know who I am? I founded a company called lastminute.com before most of you were born, and then I founded one called MyDeco, and then Made.com, and then Founders Forum, and now one of the new things is Founders Factory, and I'm also setting up my next early stage venture fund, having done one before.
Cool.
Thank you.
Super elevator pitch.
Well, very quick. Yeah. Hi, I'm Jonathan Hammond. I work for Unilever, heading up the Unilever Foundry. The Unilever Foundry is Unilever's collaboration platform to basically work with startups to partner them with our brands and functions looking for new and innovative ways to reach or understand consumers.
Lovely. Alon?
Hi, Alon Zadka. I lead delivery of innovation for Lloyds Banking Group. We are a team that was set up about 4 years ago, and we do proof of concept experiments, pilots, etc. For the entire group, looking at all the sort of use cases that we've got in our relatively diverse business.
Cool. Thanks. Paul?
Hi, I'm Paul Navarro, so I'm leading digital innovation and transformation for TSB. Our aim is to bring more competition to the UK banking market and basically transforming TSB Bank into a digital challenger, and bringing some of the learnings that we had in Spain, because TSB was bought by a Spanish banking group. So a Spanish banking group that is working with the startups and building products together with entrepreneurs and embedding the creativity from the ecosystem on what we do. So that's our objective, yeah.
Thanks very much. Okay, so to have innovation, you need to have an innovation culture. So Brent, what on earth is culture at your place? Or how would you conceive culture and communicate it to the guys you work with?
Well, how do you see culture? I mean, I think one of the things we've been keen to do, having had 2,000 plus employees at lastminute.com, which is nothing compared to what these guys have, but was still probably more than I enjoyed. So I think the culture for us has definitely been one of the lessons, has been fewer, smarter people.
Okay.
So, for example, I mean, we'll have about 200 desks in our new place, but 60 full-time employed will be Founders Factory. And the pitch behind Founders Factory is that basically we hire people that the corporates can't hire. So that's when we've pitched them to invest. So we've got 6 of the world's best corporates, including the likes of L'Oreal and Aviva and many others, The Guardian, investing. And one of the rational reasons is because we're going to help with culture change. And the other quick thing about culture is obviously it's about the ability to try stuff and fail. It's about the ability to ignore HR and ROI.
Cool. So Jonathan, like with you guys, how would you, if we had to explain what the culture is for you guys?
Yeah, I think culture is incredibly important for Unilever. I think we have a number of different frameworks that can help deliver a culture, and for us, the Unilever Foundry is one of those frameworks. And we really want to make sure that we engage with that startup mindset, that entrepreneurial mindset, and bring it back into the business. And I think over the course of the last 2 to 3 years of the Unilever Foundry, we've run roughly about 100 pilots. And we've learned a lot from that, and it's really enabled us to bring some of that mentality and that culture back into the business. We also utilize a couple of other ways of kind of developing culture or bringing that startup ethos into the business. One of them is via a mentoring program that we run. So we've partnered roughly about 100 Unilever marketeers with startups. And the great part about that is the startups get to learn, they get to understand how to navigate a company like Unilever. They get to understand how to pitch to a company the size of Unilever. But also our brand managers, directors, those guys, they get great exposure to the outside world, to outside thinking, entrepreneurial mindset, these sorts of things. So it's incredibly important, and it's something we're always focused on.
Great, thanks. Alon, for you, how do you, we were chatting before about how
Yeah.
you communicate culture and failure or the culture of...
Yeah, so I think you're in a relatively better position than we are because you can build something from scratch and you can dictate and you can try and navigate a certain culture. We are a business that's been around for 250 years. We've got people that have been around for about 250 years that still work for us. So we do have all this legacy of just a way to do things that we kind of have to challenge from within. And I think that's one of the things that we saw from an innovation perspective. It's one of our, I guess, our core missions is to challenge the organizational culture from within. And you were talking about ROIs, and you know, for Lloyds Banking Group, ROIs was gold, and still is to an extent. And often now we have to bring things into the table that don't really have a very strong ROI, but they might be a bit of a defensive play, they might be a relationship play, and we need to really educate the decision makers, the people who actually hold the money in the organization, that there's just a bit of a different way to look at the world now. And we do that through going, because we are, unlike certain banks that have got one large building where everybody is, we've got loads of buildings, we're all over the country, so it's also, just from that, very difficult to kind of make an influence that reaches scale. So we go around the country, we speak to people, we do hackathons with parts of the group, we do hackathons with the senior execs, and we try to educate them about the fact that delivery is changing, the perception of failure is changing, the perception of ROI should change, and actually, there's a better way to do things, and it's quite relatively more efficient, and we can do things and really understand where we need to get to in a relatively short period of time and with relatively little investment.
Cool, excellent. Paul, how about for you guys?
Yeah, well, I think in general, and not only in our company, and to be very transparent, so innovating from within the company, it's very complicated because big companies are organized by process, and usually the way we think about how the customer expects to receive the services is product-oriented and probably less driven by creativity and design. And I always like to compare things. So for me, it's the world of corporate and a startup is like the football team. So I mean, you have the first team that is playing in the Premier League, and they have big money, they have the way to play big matches and things like that. And then you have the second teams where you are funding the youngest players that probably will become the first players for the bigger organization. So I think that the combination of both and bringing creativity from outside is the way to progress. And it's very difficult to create these new players from within the first team. No? So if you get the example of Football Club Barcelona, so I'm from Barcelona. So Lionel Messi was created in Football Club Barcelona Accelerator. So it was a small player created in their accelerator that became a big player for the first team. So it's something similar in the big companies. So trying to drive that creativity from the first team, it's sometimes not easy because you have a calendar, you have to play the matches that you need to play, and you sometimes cannot lose focus on building new things or breaking things. No? So I think that bringing the both worlds, I mean, corporations have a scale, startups have creativity and good people, so there's a good way to combine both, to bring different ways of thinking on big corporations.
I was wondering if you give them growth injections.
Yeah.
Alon, how was 2016 then? What were your wins?
Yeah, so I guess for Lloyds and digital as a whole within Lloyds, we've got this huge program that we're working on called Customer Journey Transformation. We talked about it in the city numerous times. It's got hundreds of millions of pounds behind it. And the idea is to look at our core customer journeys, and a core customer journey is, I want to buy a home, I want to open an account, sort of very fundamental things that our customers want to do with us. And to just look at them and solve for them and to make a great experience. It's not channel dependent, that's not legacy issue dependent. The idea is to design something that's really solving for the customer. And this is something that we've been working on since a couple of years ago, and 2016 was a big milestone year because we've delivered things in mortgages, in commercial banking, and now looking into delivering things in servicing and in account opening. So I think from a digital perspective, it's been a relatively successful year for Lloyds going forward in really solving for the customers from an end-to-end perspective and from a multi-channel perspective. Within innovation, we try to team up with the transformation guys often so that we can help them, because they run on weekly sprints and they are expensive to run, so they've got they're very delivery oriented. So where we can come in and carve a question that they have, carve it out, and explore it on our own and come back with the findings a couple of weeks later, that can add a huge amount of value to them because it can really help to steer that large boat in the right direction.
Cool. Jonathan, so what worked well for you guys in 2016?
Yeah, 2016 was a big year for us. We passed the 100 pilot mark, which was a huge milestone for us and something we're incredibly proud of. We also took another 50 startups to Cannes Lion this year and introduced them to the industry. We actually have 20 startups just outside the curtain if you want to see on your way out. Some great companies out there. So I think 2016 for us was really about making sure that we deliver that process of understanding how to launch and learn and to pilot within the organization. And I think we've done a really good job of being able to drive that culture throughout the business and drive that understanding. And this new mentality, you touched on it before, this mentality is quite a tough thing to get across within large organizations. Mm-hmm. So I think that was a big success for us. Going forward, it's really about saying, okay, well, how do we then scale up those companies out of the 100 that were successful? How do we really take those and scale them across the business? And that's our focus going forward.
Cool. So yeah, Brent,
Yeah, so look, we've done a lot of different things this year, but I think the relevant context here is probably, it's exciting to sit on the stage with lots of large corporates and lots of entrepreneurs in the room, because I think that's playing to London's advantage. So what London has is world-class corporates. Look, we don't have the Googles and Facebooks, but we do have world-class corporates, and world-class corporates who are now, you're banging on an open door when you're asking them to find ways of interfacing with startups. They get that now, whereas maybe 10, 15 years ago, it was a much harder conversation. They thought they could do everything themselves. And now you're seeing this much more open attitude by virtue of these guys being here. We have therefore also launched a consultancy called Founders Intelligence that works with brilliant companies like Jonathan at Unilever, like Diageo, like News Corp, like Visa and Fannie Mae, and we help them interface with the startup community and do digital transformation. And within that, we've got Founders Factory now off the ground, which is what we consider to be the best incubator and accelerator across Europe. It's certainly, I think, the best funded and has the most full-time employees working for it. And by dint of having 6 of the world's best corporates behind it, it provides real differentiation in that space. The other thing in this context that we've also got some momentum with this year is a little startup that I co-founded and chair called SmartUp, which isn't so little anymore. It is a platform for entrepreneurs to learn from other entrepreneurs that we launched with 0 ROI when the CEO said to me, as chairman, like, what about this revenue model and this one years forward? And I'm like, let's not think about revenue at all. I just want to think about making a useful product. He did a brilliant job with the team of making a useful product. And what then happened is large corporates approached us, saw the product being promoted on the App Store, and said, actually, we want to use this SmartUp for all our employees to do culture change and learning. So it is now still the former, but it's also a learning management tool for companies like DBS in Singapore, where it's been rolled out to 32,000 employees and is mandatory. The other interesting one for this audience probably is we've also done a deal with UKTI, or the new name of UK Trade, to launch with 2 of our companies together. We are launching an export tool to help startups learn and smaller companies learn how to export. And then with the other one of our companies called Grip, we then help them work out who they should meet who's actually done a similar type of exporting and can help give them advice on a phone call or online or whatever. So that's a few of the things, but there's more, but that's probably enough from me.
Cool. Well, okay, so that's all the amazing things you've done this year. So naturally, what hasn't worked so well, and what will you guys look to do different in 2017 based upon things that you thought, maybe I'd like to do it differently next year? I'll start with Brent and we'll come back this way maybe.
You want me to finish?
Yeah, for me it's hard. I think, so you go, you start.
No, I'm gonna just finish a little bit with what we've done this year. I mean, we think, honestly, that the battlefield for banking in the coming years will be about interface and data, and how do you embed the banking services in multiple platforms. Mm-hmm. And to be honest, many banks are not ready with their technological platforms for that feature. So our main objective this year and next year is building an entirely new platform for the UK banking market. It's going to be similar to the one we have in Spain, completely open, and being able to embed things wherever we need to embed, and really the way banks should be working in the future is in a more open way. So if you look at what's coming for the banking industry, PSD2, open data, it will be a big battlefield around interfaces and who will own the relationship with the customer. And the systems that the bank have today are not prepared to manage the transformation of the interface and data at the speed that will come. So we think that the challenge for banking industry is that there are many banks running in the last century technological platforms, and how do you really transform those platforms to achieve where it's coming into the market?
Excellent, thank you. Now you've had time to think about it. What would you do differently?
What would you do differently? I mean, look, I think one of the problems of the interface world, which is what we're operating in a bit now, is things happen slower than you'd like. So when you are talking with corporate, I mean, every corporate will say this, there is processes. So look, we would have liked to have closed Founders Factory a year earlier rather than we probably ended up closing in September this year. So I think you've got to be natural optimist to even try this stuff. To get 6 corporates into one vehicle, you've got to be an optimist and think you're going to do it quicker than you can. So I think that would be one. I think, otherwise it's always just setting the bar. I think you have to set the bar higher for talent that you bring into the organization. So I think we're now on a good path for that. But earlier in the year, that was probably our biggest unknown, was would we be able to get, with this concept, the talent that we promised we would. And so I'm excited so far with that. And as an example, one of our little teams won TechCrunch did a hackathon over the weekend. And it was interesting. The guys were like, what do you do? And they're like, well, we do this professionally. And then they're like, oh my God, and if we don't win, what happens? And so they did win the AI Watson Prize. So that's just a good indication of the types of people we've got around us.
Yeah, so when we reached this milestone earlier in the year, we basically did a review. We spoke to a lot of startups. We spoke to a lot of our brand teams to understand kind of what learnings that we had to date and what could we take forward. And I think one of the biggest ones that came out was, and it sounds so obvious, but it's around combining innovation with insight. So not just doing tech tourism. And I think some big corporates can get caught in the space of doing tech tourism where it's, well, that was a nice day, and now I'm going to go back to my day job and continue with what I was doing previously. And I think it's really important that on our side, on the corporate side, that we make sure that our briefs and our work with the companies like Founders Intelligence are really tight, and we know what we're after and how it ladders back to our brand strategies. But conversely, it's also really important that the startups understand what those targets are and how their technology can help us solve or speak to that brand strategy. Because without that, those two lining up, the conversation can't really happen.
Alon.
So you have to understand, doing innovation in a place like Lloyds is difficult because the organization isn't really geared up for it. And most people within Lloyds would work on one project for about 2 to 3 years, especially if you look at something that's got some sort of an IT impact. Whereas we can do about 30 or 40 different ones a year. So we are in a position when you can get a lot of data from different sources throughout the course of a year. So if I look back at the 4 years that we've been running, we've changed our model probably about every 6 months. Just our delivery model, the way that we do things, our team size, it's been very flexible. And the reason why that is because we didn't really know how to do it. We had to make our own mistakes and kind of learn from them. Looking at stuff that could have worked better this year, the previous year, it's all the how to get things into the hands of customers. It's a challenge because you've got an organization that is used to running 6 months of risk due diligence and 2 months of legal due diligence and 10 months of sourcing due diligence. So all these things we have to kind of shrink into 1 week. And that's something that we've been struggling and battling through for the past 4 years. And we're seeing strides, but the idea is you have to cut that time to the customer. And even if we're talking about a small experiment, a small prototype, that time to customer has to be cut down completely. And we're doing, I think, great work, but there's still a lot of work to be done.
Cool. How about for you guys?
I think in general and in our organization, what we could have done different or what we plan to do different is experimenting more things and learning faster. Because at the end of the day, we create our future, and it's about experimenting things and learning on that process. When you look at things that, like the Amazon Go that they launched 2 days ago, that you can go to a retail store and shop with your hands on your pockets and without doing anything, why hasn't a bank or Visa or MasterCard invented that? So it's a mindset thing. It's about, we are thinking about regulation, PSD2, and many things, and these guys are thinking about the customer and what people is expecting from these companies. So I think that experimentation and learning faster it's one of the challenges. And generating an ecosystem that allows you to really create things, experiment and fail and learn from that. So this is one of the things that, again, banks are still focused on products and regulation and not on designing and creativity. So it's bringing that way of doing things in the DNA of the organization.
Yeah, and I think if I just follow up on that, so Paul's been referring a lot to PSD2, which is the EU regulation that forces us to open APIs for third parties and startups to kind of take that customer front end using our back end as effectively a utility. And I think banks have always been very responsive to these large regulatory changes, and that's not changing. But whenever something like that comes along, there's probably about 2 years of us talking about the risk and the IT impact and budgeting for it without really talking about the opportunity. And that view is starting to change. But I think talking about the opportunity of stuff like open banking should have happened probably right at the same time when you start talking about the impact of the IT infrastructure.
Yeah, excellent, thank you. So Brent, how do you define when something's a success, and how do you define when to kill something?
Yeah, when to kill something is the hardest thing, because you can be years ahead, right? And many people just say if you're too far ahead, the only reason that stuff fails is just when you give up, when you should actually be, you should keep going. But I think for me, the rationale to give up actually has been the one time I really decided to sort of sell off a business was when I didn't feel we'd got the DNA of the team right at the beginning. And that really echoed back to what one of my board members at lastminute.com told me very early on. She just said, look, the DNA of your first employees is the DNA of the company forever. It's just so hard to change. So if you just make a few hires wrong really early, then they hire wrong. And I think then you get in the cycle where you haven't got a rock star A-team. And to be honest, from my point of view, I'm very lucky to also be able to say that's just not exciting. I want to spend every day with brilliant people who I learn from. And if I'm not doing that, that's also a sanity check of. And then the last thing is, would I really be investing myself more into this thing? And if the team aren't rock stars, then no. So I think that's when you should cut it, if you feel you can't break the DNA of a company and it's not quite right.
Thanks. Jonathan, what's success and when do you kill something?
Yeah, so we define success predominantly by whether or not the company has decided to continue to work with these startups ongoing post that pilot period. And I think you touched on it earlier, and I think it's quite an interesting one, is the length of time that you might need to give some of these innovations might be a lot longer than what the core of our business is typically used to, because I think sometimes the technology or the innovation can be ahead of its time. So it's really about weighing it up case by case and understanding whether or not this technology is kind of on the way up, or is it not right. But ultimately, it comes down to for killing them off is this technology or the startup enabling us to do something more effective, more efficient, more sustainable, versus the status quo. If it's not enabling us to do that, then it's probably better just to carry on as we are.
Cool, thank you.
So for us, the idea is to generate as much data as possible before anybody can make a decision. And I think delivery model in large organization, large banks in the past has been somebody comes up with an idea, they test it with their stakeholders say, okay, go validate it with some customers. They bring in some customers, they ask them, dear customer, if we had given you this, would you want it? And customers always say yes. And then there you go, customers validated it, so let's go and build it. 2-year delivery cycle turns into 3 years, X amount of million turns into 2X amount of million, and by the time that it's in the market, customers might have just completely moved on, or it was just the wrong thing to begin with. I think the idea now is we need to be able to pivot those things and to kill them much earlier. And in order to do that, we really need to be able to validate it with some real data.
Okay.
So it's prototyping, it's building designs, knocking up designs really quickly and putting them in front of customers. If you've got something that's really tricky, don't go into just 5, go into 50. If you've got something that you can maybe put on the cloud or put in sort of a sandbox environment that can actually be live to an extent, let's go and do that. All these things have a cost associated with them, so we have to be very responsive to that. But the idea is to educate the organization that certain types of failure are actually quite positive.
Yes, yeah. Paul?
I think that the best success is not trying to success, Because one of the risks is trying to be perfect, no? So, and there are many organizations that are obsessed on launching a perfect product. And as Ray Hoffman says, so if you are not embarrassed of your first version of your product, you are launching very late, no? So the thing is, trying to be obsessed in successing on a product usually pushes the organization to delay things and make things perfect and not learning from the process. So it's trying to get the success from the learnings that you had using your product with your customers and having the right metrics to change the things when you think that you are not getting the traction that you should be getting, you are not getting the number of users that you are expecting to get or whatever. But trying to organize the organization for success, sometimes it's a failure because we are creating things for a future that we don't know. So it's really trying to find the success in the way you build those things.
Excellent, thanks. So look, following on from what you're saying, Brent, about if you hire the wrong people, then you're very difficult. What kind of tips would you give to the audience about how to assess if you have the right culture in your organization, and if you don't, what do you do to change it or improve it? Or is it you just fire everyone and rehire, you know?
Well, firing everyone's always a good start. If it's really wrong. No, I mean, I think we have heard, you know, from some of these my fellow panelists that one of the biggest challenges in corporates and where I've been on big company boards is tenure. It's that they become great, wonderful places to stay for too long, and you know that way you don't get new thinking. And one of the biggest challenges I find when I ran lastminute.com for 8 years, it was sort of at the end I found myself saying, well, I was sometimes the guy who said, well, we tried this before of a new idea, so here's why we can't do it. Whereas that's always the wrong approach. So look, to change culture, I mean, I think one of the other great things about culture in startups is you should have creative chaos. Everybody should be absolutely stretched beyond what their comfort zone. They should have more responsibility than they'd get anywhere else. And they should be there because they find every day exciting and the work interesting. And so it's a mismatch of hiring. If you're finding people who aren't enjoying what they do every day, then you should let them go. So I think it was Netflix who had that great slide deck on culture. But one of the things was I think they would pay everyone to leave. Yeah. So if you wanted to leave, you got this very generous offer because they're like, I thought that was wonderfully counterintuitive. And it was just saying, look, if you're the sort of person who's thinking of leaving, then actually go. Please do us a favor, go, because you haven't got your heart and soul into this, and we want people with heart and soul in there. So I think that would be one technique. The other way to see if your culture's good is, and we noticed this again early on at lastminute.com, is people wanted to socialize with each other. Mm-hmm. So the pub at the bottom of our road was full because of people with each other, of our teams. And then within that, the other thing is just, there is some element of forcing culture, and some of that is having areas where you're sure that people can meet each other, socialize, and forcing that events. I mean, we do our own internal events a lot to try and get people to get together and talk about different things.
Cool. I mean, and you're very much in that space, so how do you imbue good culture with these guys that you're mentoring?
Yeah, I think it's very hard to establish a good culture without providing a platform. So the Foundry is that platform that enables people to pioneer, to experiment, to think of things, of new ways of doing business. And a couple of other ways that we do it outside of the mentoring as well is we have what's called the Unilever Foundry Network, which is essentially people that have almost self-selected, put their hand up and said, I'd like to be part of this. I love what you guys are doing here. And they might be, you know, the Dove director or the Magnum brand manager or any other brand. And essentially, you know, we partner with them to help them. They become the Foundry champion in their group or function. So the voice of the Unilever Foundry. We're a big company. We've got offices in hundreds of countries around the world, so it's impossible to really have arms and legs everywhere. So they really enable us to have that voice. And in return, we look to, you know, help them engage and understand new technologies, understand what startups can offer, and really give them exposure to new ways of doing things. So, for example, we took 8 of our members to South by Southwest earlier in the year. You know, and it's tomorrow we're actually bringing roughly about 100 Unilever marketeers from our global head office to unBound as well, which is a great way for them to really see the outside world and experience that culture.
Cool, thanks.
So
I was talking earlier about we are a large organization, we're really spread out, and we've got people that have been around for 30 or 40 years. It's again very difficult to change, but we did see digital as a bit of a beacon of light that will drive a cultural change across the entire organization, and space is actually a big part of it, because space is how people socialize, space is how people spend their days in the office. And when I first joined Lloyds, we had offices up in Shaftesbury Avenue, which is a really great address, but the offices were a bit asbestos-y, shall we say. And we moved the entire digital team onto our own building, and that building I think it was trying to be a bit of a mishmash between banking and Google kind of thing. So you have the colorful sofas. But what you don't have, and that is a big thing, is you don't have offices, which means that you had to take all the MDs from the corner offices and put them in the open space. Hugely controversial, by the way, hugely controversial. And I don't think they particularly liked it when it was decided. But over time, and we've been in that building for just over 3 years, and over time, people become more accessible, there are more conversations. Hierarchy, while very clear in a bank, it becomes a bit less restrictive. And I think when the culture in digital goes the right direction, we can then go and start influencing the wider group.
Great, very nice. Paul?
I think that we are, in the process of driving a change culture and really engaging the organization to think different. That's why I think that one of the challenges in general on the top management of the organizations is to force that people to be hands-on on what the customer needs, because sometimes we take decisions to design things for ourselves, but not for our users and customers, and really getting closer to what our customers need. And I think that to drive that change sometimes is bringing that people all together in a space when they really can understand what we are building, and they being part of that process. No? I think that sometimes we are quite far from what the customer needs, and we are probably taking financial decisions and things like that, but not design decisions, and how we do embed that thinking. If you look at companies like Uber, all the executives of Uber are going every day driving with their cars and things like that, so experimenting what their customers feel. So for me, the thing is how we do make that design process, and we bring hands-on all the executives on that design process, because that is forcing them to think out of the box and think outside of what we need, and thinking about what our customers need is driving that cultural change. On the other side, we built an accelerator also in Barcelona, so bringing some of our executives to work together and mentor some of these startups also shows them that there are different ways to approach the problems and to work, and really understanding that probably we have to learn different ways to do our job.
Thanks. There's been a lot of studies and talk of the value of diversity and how it makes an organization more aware of trends and things. Maybe we should have more diverse panel, that kind of thing. Is it something that you structurally implement, or how do you manage the potential benefits of considering diversity in terms of employment and then imbuing in the culture? Is that something you bolt on, or how do you integrate it, or what's your strategy on it, Brent?
Diversity is a very tough question. I think time will help in that. So where we really address it most is in two of our things, which is slightly different. So we have Accelerate Her, which is a network to promote female entrepreneurship, an event. And then we also have Founders of the Future, where we are 40% female, where we spot talent in organizations like these, and we say, you should be an entrepreneur. We get peer review and AI and big data, and we pull people out. And it's much easier to be diverse when you're at that stage. Where we find it very hard separately is like when we organize an event like Founders Forum, where there's a key criteria that people should have sold a business for over $500 million, trying to pretend that there are as many women who've done that as men is a nonsense and would become tokenistic if we did it, which I don't think is the right approach. However, in terms of hiring, obviously one of the things I have done in hiring is two of the businesses I co-founded were with female founders. So obviously lastminute.com, and then made.com also had a female co-founder. So that helps, and actually the head of Made Europe really now is also a very talented woman. So But that's just gender diversity is actually only one aspect, obviously. I think
Yeah.
cultural diversity probably gets a lot less airing at events like these. So I think you can have some outreach programs, some natural. You can bias a bit you can bias within reason to try and
Yeah.
benefit teams.
Yeah. Thanks, Jonathan.
Yeah, I'd echo what Brent mentioned there. We're actually really looking forward to thinking about how we can partner and accelerate her as well. I think for us, diversity and inclusion is a big piece. It's one of the global goals which Unilever has signed up to as well. We ran a campaign earlier this year on behalf of Unilever Total called Unstereotype, which is about raising this exact issue around diversity in the advertising industry. For us at the Unilever Foundry, it's something that we really want to continue to focus on and look to build as we go forward because, as you rightly point out, there is obviously an over-representation here on the panel. And where we can, we look to make sure that we push that agenda.
Cool,
Yeah, and you're probably going to get somebody who'll tweet, and it's going to get retweeted lots, an all-male panel discussing diversity, which I think is actually, to be honest, really naff. It's like, would they rather you didn't address the topic, or,
I'll take a different take on the question, actually. So I think there's the question of demographic diversity, which is well understood, well covered, and I think well agreed across everybody, also kind of mindful of the irony.
Yeah.
But then there's another one of skill and attitudinal diversity as well. So you were talking earlier about hiring people that the corporates wouldn't hire. I think we probably hire some of those people that the corporates wouldn't hire as well. If you go up and down our offices, you're going to see some very scruffy-looking developers and some uber-hipster designers, which we do bring in because they do bring something else that we didn't really have before. And I think
beyond their poor dress sense.
and a high day rate. But I think again, you will see more of this in the digital side of the business than in the banking side of the business, which is to be understood. But the idea is to bring as many more views into the table as you can.
Yeah, well, I agree mostly what we said. So, I mean, especially in TSB, it's very focused on diversity, and it's a top priority of our executive committee in terms of bringing women and men to work. And, well, you have an example here. I'm from Spain, so working for a Britain company. So diversity is part of our DNA. All my direct reports are ladies, so it's something that adds different angles on looking at the problems. No? And I think that especially London, that is a very diverse city, this is why it's so creative, because you have different visions and different people looking at the same problem from a different angle, so it's good for creativity. I think that one of the challenges probably in the big corporations like banks or other big corporations is the diversity on age. I think that the future workers of bigger companies, we have a challenge to attract new talent and young talent especially. So what should companies like us do in the future to attract this talent and these young people to work with us? Because if not, the thinking that we'll put on our products and services will be only for a group of customers and not for the young ones.
Thanks, cool.
But just quickly, I think overall the message on diversity should actually, what we haven't said is actually, it's actually very positive. It is happening. The change is actually pretty dramatic.
Yeah.
You can't expect change overnight, but actually when I see young entrepreneurs pitching to me, a huge amount of women and more culturally diverse as well. So I think it is happening, and when you see in the ranks of corporates and on the ranks of corporate boards, you're starting to see women rise up, so it is happening. Yeah.
Absolutely. Great. So look, thanks to all our panel, Paul, Alon, Jonathan and Brent, and hopefully that was useful, and everyone's pretty accessible on Twitter if you want to ping them a follow-up question. So thanks very much.